Hey, what's up, everybody? Benji Bruce here with SpeakingLifestyle.com. And, several years ago, I was actually in a position where I didn't know if this was actually going to work out. And I didn't know if I'd be able to speak for a living. And I was literally terrified that I would have to go get a normal job. I mean, I was working hard, I was giving it my all, I was reading all these freaking books, listening to other speakers on marketing, but I just wasn't getting any results. I mean, I still wasn't getting on stages. And it seemed like all the advice was working for everyone except me. Now, I don't know if you've ever felt that way or not, but it basically sucks when you know you want to speak on more stages, but for some reason, nothing is actually working. So in this video, I'm going to fix that. I'm going to show you what worked for me and how I got to a point where I'm going on stages for companies like Remax, Aflac, AAA, Hilton, Best Buy, Furniture First, a ton of other companies. I'm going to show you what worked for me. And it's easy to just say like, oh, well, my situation is different and I've got all this other stuff going on and my speaking business and my topics are different from yours. And I said the same thing. I mean, I figured since I was doing mind reading with speaking, I figured, okay, my stuff is different. So eventually things changed and I was able to fill up my entire speaking schedule with paid gigs. And I'm talking about getting gigs for $10,000 or more. And several other speakers, I mean, they asked me, how did I do it? Basically, how did I change everything around? How did I go from a point where I'm terrified that I'm going to have to get a normal job to a point where I'm charging $10,000 for a 45-minute keynote with a company like Aflac? And I remember the first wake-up call that I actually had, and it was actually when I was in high school, and I wanted to get more gigs, but I just didn't know how. And I met this magician who was actually booking a lot of gigs, and he was a magician, and I didn't think he was any better than me. In fact, I actually thought I was way better. I mean, that was my ego saying I'm way better than this guy, but he still booked more gigs than me at the time at a higher price. And I didn't know what he was doing differently. And the same with speaking and the same with speakers. I just didn't know what they were doing differently. Like, how were some speakers getting gigs? I just didn't know what they were doing. And of course, I mean, they would say things like, oh, have a great presentation. And I was like, okay, I do have a great presentation, but what's next? And basically, the advice didn't really help. But one day, I actually got a business card from a guy who saw me at an event. And I said to my magician friend, I said, hey, man, this guy gave me a business card and he wanted me to give him a call. But I mean, what do I say to this guy? So my magician friend, he just grabbed the freaking card from me, pulled out his phone, called the guy right there and then. And I was like, whoa, what are you going to say? And so my friend is like, I don't know yet. And I'm thinking like, oh, damn it. Like, he's going to screw this thing up. So the guy answers the phone. I mean, my friend has him on speaker. The guy answers the phone and my friend says, hey, this is Rich so-and-so. I don't want to say his last name. Hey, this is Rich. I'm an agent for Benji Bruce. He's the guy that you saw at the event the other night. What do you think about him? And so the guy, he was like, oh, well, we thought he was great. And so my friend goes, well, great. What do you think about having him at one of your events? And I mean, you've got an event coming up where you could use him, right? Now, at the time, I was only doing mind reading shows, so I wasn't speaking. So this is why the guy responded like this. And so the guy said, he said, well, I mean, I do have a daughter who's turning 8. I mean, we could bring him into, and then my friend just cut him off right there and then. And he's like, oh, no. He's like, Benji Bruce doesn't do kid shows. He's too big time for that. I've seen this guy create a crowd of several hundred people just staring around a salt shaker, mesmerized at what he's about to do next. I mean, you've seen this guy. This guy's incredible. You want to bring him to your big time events for your big clients. And eventually, my friend, the way he was talking me up like that, he got me hired right there and then. And that's when it clicked for me. I mean, I realized why he was booking all these gigs and why I wasn't. It was because he understood the business side of things. He understood that if you don't know how to run a business, then you won't have a business. And I realized the same thing for speaking. If I wanted to get speaking gigs, then I have to really run a business and stop messing around. Instead of treating it like a hobby, I had to treat it like a real business. And that's where speakers fall short. Speakers think that if they have a great message, if they have this purpose of changing people's lives, and they think that is enough to fill up their entire speaking schedule and to speak for a living. But unless you truly understand how the business side works and you truly understand the back end of what makes and what runs a real speaking business, then you just won't have one. But if you truly commit to actually getting the business side of things down, then you're going to be the speaker on stage speaking for a living where other speakers are asking you like, hey man, how do you book all those gigs? It's a simple shift, but most speakers, they don't see it. I mean, at first, I didn't realize how business oriented you have to be because I would see guys like Tony Robbins, Brian Tracy, Les Brown. I'd see all kinds of speakers like them, and they would all talk about things like your mission and being positive and having a vision and all that kind of stuff. What I didn't see was the behind the scenes stuff that allowed those types of speakers to run a business. I didn't see the things that allowed them to make money as a speaker. I mean, someone like Tony Robbins, he doesn't build a $500 million business without knowing about business. So when I wasn't growing my speaking business, I wasn't sure why things weren't working. And that was the first aha moment for me when my friend did that. And I started studying business. I started reading a lot, doing everything that I could to get more business oriented. And I had some success, but it still wasn't where I wanted it to be. No matter how many books I was reading, no matter how much business I studied, for some reason, I just couldn't really get it to work. But what changed for me was when I finally reached the point where I was just looking at everything and I was looking at everything I was doing, all the excuses I was given and all the things that just weren't getting me results. And I literally said, forget this. I mean, not that type of F word. I was like, F this. And I was like, I know I can do way more than what I'm doing right now. Stop BSing yourself. I know I'm not really giving it my all. I know I can be more committed than what I am now. Basically, I stopped making excuses. I stopped talking about how much money I didn't have. I stopped talking about how I didn't know how to build a website. I literally just stopped making excuses. You can't imagine what the difference is like when you finally get to a point where you're speaking for a living, charging $10,000 for a keynote and being able to just be on stage doing what you want to do. I'm going to walk you through the entire process, the steps, the psychology, everything I did to get to a point where everything just clicked and I made a speaking business. I made it just take off. There are some speakers who are listening to this who maybe they're already getting some gigs, but not as many as they would like. There are some speakers listening to this who are just kind of right there on the edge and they just need a little push in the right direction, a little guidance on getting started. And then there are some speakers who are listening to this who are already successful in another business and they just want to take things to a new level. I can honestly say to you that I love what I do. Right now, I'm recording this in a hotel room and I just got done on stage. I'm heading out tomorrow for another event. There's nothing better than when things just click, when you really speak for a living. But it's only because I figured out the business side of things. I figured out what really works, how to fill up my entire speaking schedule, and little things that make a speaking business profitable. I'm going to start that process for you right here, right now in this video. If you really want to grow your speaking business and take it to the next level, then I'm going to guide you through the process. I'm going to show you what I did from the very beginning and what I am currently doing now. Because, I mean, how I was able to go from essentially being desperate to going from 50 paid events a year, all that was all business minded, and getting clients like Aflac to pay $10,000 to have me on stage. All that was learning how to run a business. If you like what I have to say in this video and you get enough out of this, then hopefully you're going to join the Speak Pro Academy, where I literally help you grow your entire speaking business from scratch. It's literally a 90-day program, 12 weeks, where we do everything to build and grow your speaking business and make sure that you're getting a consistent stream of gigs coming in. Now, it's only for the speakers who are obviously 100% committed, because growing a speaking business isn't for the weak. And if you don't realize that you're running a business, then you just won't have one. Tony Robbins, He has helped millions of people. I mean, he has a mission in life, but he also understands that he is running a business, and without the business side of things, he wouldn't be able to help anyone. So here's the thing that you need to know. You need to know that no matter where you are now in your speaking business, you can always take it up a notch. It's not hard for you to fill up your entire schedule, your entire speaking schedule, and make at least six figures a year. In fact, the specific things that you have to do are actually very easy. It's just a matter of doing the right things. It's really the 80-20 rule. I mean, building your speaking business doesn't require you to do a ton of things. It just requires you to do the right things in the right order at the right time. And I'm going to show you what those right things are. So let me tell you what type of change is required for this to work. For the longest time, I used to ask myself, how do I get speaking gigs? And I would keep asking myself that question. How do I get gigs? How do I get gigs? Now, you probably ask yourself that question several times, and you feel like you're essentially going through this mental loop. You might have been asking yourself the same question just over and over for a long time, and it's like you're in the same place today as you were several months ago, and you always ask that question. But eventually I realized that I was asking the question of how to get gigs, and I realized that that's a horrible question to ask. And the reason it's horrible, the reason it's bad, is because it's not focused. There are tons of ways to get speaking gigs. There's cold calling, sending emails, direct mail, social media, AdWords. There's all kinds of different ways. So when you ask, how do I get more speaking gigs? Your mind isn't focused on an answer because the question itself is too broad. So what did I do? Well, instead of asking, how do I get speaking gigs? I started asking smarter questions. I started asking, okay, how can I get speaking gigs by sending emails? What should I say when I send an email? Where do I find people who are going to hire me? Do you see the difference? Do you see how those are better questions? What I realize is that the speakers who grow their speaking business and really speak for a living, they ask better questions. You've probably seen a speaker or know a speaker who's getting a lot of gigs, and you don't think that they're any better than you. I mean, you know they're getting gigs, but you're not like, oh man, they're a million times better than me. In fact, you've probably seen speakers who are a million times worse than you, but they're still getting booked to speak and they're still making money. It's not that they're smarter than you. It's just that they're doing the right things. They're asking better questions. They have a process down for how they get gigs, and they're just doing all the right things, and they're not wasting their time doing things that don't matter. I talk with a lot of speakers who ask about the business, and basically there's one thing that I really notice. A lot of speakers, they inherently know that they should treat their speaking business like a business. Every speaker I know, every speaker I talk to, they know that. They know that they should treat it like a real business, but very few actually do it. A huge difference between the speakers who do this for a living, making at least six figures, and every other speaker that isn't doing it for a living, is that the speakers who do this for a living, they realize that they are running a business. They treat it like a real business, not some hobby, and they're not ashamed to admit it. They wake up every single day fully committed to growing their business. They understand that they want to deliver their message, but they also understand that if they don't get the business side of things down, then nobody will hear that message in the first place. The speakers who get booked are the ones who truly understand the business side of things. When I finally understood this, I stopped messing around. And I literally went from a couple $100, charging a couple hundred, to getting over $10,000 for a presentation. I mean, it wasn't just 200 to immediately 10 grand, but I went from 200 to 10 grand. It didn't take me as long as it should have. It didn't take me as long as other speakers because I knew which things to focus on. And more importantly, I knew which things to ignore. Unfortunately, for the longest time, I knew that I should treat it like a business, but I just never really did. I mean, in the back of my mind, I was like, yeah, I should treat it like a business, but I never really did for the longest time. I mean, I would get one gig and I'd be all happy and I'd post everything on Facebook and I'd try to squeeze as much out of that one gig as possible. So I'd get one gig and I'd post a status of when I'm at the airport so people could see it. I'd take a picture of the plane, and when I got to the hotel, I'd take a picture, and and I make sure to tag the location of the of where I'm at, so that way everyone knew I was really there. Then I'd take a picture when I'm at the event, and I'd take a picture of the hotel. Basically, I'd milk it out like crazy. But that was really like the only gig I did for like 4 months. And when people asked me how the speaking business was, I was like, "Oh, it's great. I love doing this for a living. Best job ever." In fact, I would even post things like that on Facebook. I'd be like, "Man, speaking is the best job ever." But deep down, I knew that I wasn't giving it my all. I knew that I should be doing a whole lot better than what I was. So I started reading more business books, listening to audio tapes, reading things online, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna make this work." And I would essentially get myself motivated somehow, and maybe from like reading a book or seeing an article online about millionaires and billionaires, and I would say things like, "Okay, this is it. I'm finally gonna get this thing going. I've said it before, but this time I'm serious. When I wake up tomorrow, I'm gonna go full force." And I'd say things like that constantly, and then I would wake up the next day, send out a couple of emails, and little by little, I could actually feel the energy kind of just slowing down, the motivation just leaving me. And I'd send out a few emails, I'd talk to a few people, and then, of course, I'd stop. But I wouldn't just stop completely. I'd sit down and I'd maybe read a book or a blog. That way I didn't feel like I was completely wasting my time. But before I knew it, I was essentially back in the same spot as before. I wasn't doing anything. I was just wishing and hoping someone would contact me for a gig, wishing someone would send me an email saying, "Hey, we want to hire you." But that never happened. Every time I checked my email, there was nothing in there, nothing in the inbox. Now, at the time, I was actually performing in a restaurant as well. So I would walk up to tables and I would ask if they wanted to like see some mind reading demonstrations, and I'd perform for them, and I'd get tips. And the restaurants, they paid me anywhere from $50 to $100 an hour, and I'd be there for 2 hours. And I was doing this at two restaurants at the time. So for 2 hours, I could get like $200 from the restaurant plus tips. So I was making some money in high school and all that, but I wasn't really like speaking for a living and none of that stuff. Then I kind of just got pimp slapped one day. Basically what happened was one of the general managers called me into her office, and she said like, "Hey, Benji, we love what you're doing, but we just can't afford to pay you anymore." And I thought to myself like, "Damn, all right, that sucks." But at least I got money from the other restaurant because I was doing two restaurants at the time. So I was like, okay, I still got this restaurant. And literally the next week, the other general manager calls me into his office and he says, "Hey, Benji, yeah, today's the last day we can pay you. We just aren't making as much money as we used to." And I thought to myself, like, mother freaker. And not more bad words than that. I was like, mother freaking A. And just like that, my entire income stopped. If there was ever a moment where I really got scared, it was this moment. Just like that, my income stopped. I got home that day, and after being pissed off at the world, pissed off at the general managers, I literally thought that I would have to get a normal job. I was even searching on Craigslist. I wasn't getting speaking gigs. I wasn't performing in the restaurants anymore. Nothing. So I'm thinking like, holy crap, I really am going to have to get a job. This is it. This is the nail in the coffin. And it scared the hell out of me. I've never had a job, and I didn't want a job. I didn't want to work for someone else. I wanted to work for myself. I wanted to be on stage speaking for a living and getting paid to do it. At that moment, I realized that I needed to get more serious about this business. I realized that I literally wasn't living up to my full potential, and I wasn't really doing as much as I knew I should be doing. So I sat down, I figured it out. I figured out exactly how I was going to get my entire business, what events to contact, how to contact them, what to say to them to get them to hire me. I just sat down and I figured it out. And for the longest time, I'd say things like, yeah, I already know that. But I wasn't actually doing it. If I would have heard like a well-known speaker talk about the business side of things, I'd say things like, "Oh yeah, I learned that stuff years ago." And I remember hearing a speaker where they talked about using cold calls to get gigs, and I was like, "Yeah, that's old school. I know that stuff." And I hear him talk about having a great website or direct mail. I'm like, "Yeah, I know all that stuff. Selling products, blah blah blah. I know all that." And basically, I read so many books that I was thinking, like, man, come on, someone tell me something new. I mean, I can't believe you're a freaking top speaker and you're just talking about all this old school stuff. That's stuff I learned a long time ago. But because I was so desperate to make money at the time, I really didn't, I didn't want to have to go get a normal job. I just kind of thought to myself, like, you know what? I'm just going to make this work. I mean, it's time to stop messing around. I'm just going to make this work. And I literally put everything to work. I started getting the right video footage, the right website, contacting the right people, saying the right things. I started implementing, and guess what? I started getting booked. I remember for the first time that I literally got $10,000 for an event. And I thought to myself, like, holy shiznit, this stuff actually works. And I remember for the first time, I actually said no to a gig where they offered me $2,500 to speak. And the reason I said no is because $2,500, it was too low of a speaking fee. And after I hung up the phone, I kind of just thought, I was like, oh my goodness, did I really just turn down $2,500 for an hour because it wasn't enough? And I can't tell you how good it feels to be able to turn down a gig because you know that you're going to make more from another gig. When you take your speaking business seriously and when you do all the right things, it just works. I'm going to show you what works. There was a lot of work that I had to do to get to a point where I could charge $10,000. And I want to make that very clear. I want you to take a mental note of what you have to do and take a mental note of this one thing, because this one thing, it will guide you on the path to growing your speaking business. It's this. If you want to charge $10,000, you have to look like a $10,000 speaker. Now, we're going to talk more about that in a second, but before I was able to really get paid higher speaking fees, there was like this huge psychological barrier that I had to overcome. And I mean huge. I mean, sure, I wanted $10,000 to speak, but before I did that, I had to overcome this huge psychological barrier for me. You see, I was essentially the type of person that you would call cheap, very, very cheap. I didn't like spending money. I mean, like, I literally felt mental pain when I spent money. I mean, I was so bad that I remember being at a club, and it was like after high school, really. Well, like right there as I graduated. My brother was at the club, a friend was at the club. And then after the club, like we're having a good time. After the club, there's this really good looking girl, and we were talking, and she was like, "Hey, what are you gonna do after this?" So I said, like, oh, we're just gonna go to Denny's. Like, you and your girls can come if you want. So she asked, like, hey, can I ride with you? So I'm like, sure, why not? So she said she's the only one coming. Her friends are gonna do whatever. So she's in my car. My brother and the friend are in his car. And as we're driving, I look over at this girl and I realize, like, okay, she has a skin tight dress on, and there are no pockets. So I noticed that she doesn't have a purse and she has nothing but her phone. So I say to her, I look over to her, I say, hey, where's your money? And she says, oh, I didn't bring it. And I say, well, how were you going to pay for the food? And she says, I thought you were going to pay. So I responded, well, how much do you have on you? And she goes, I only have $1. So right there and then I call my brother up on the phone. I say, hey, Daniel, so this girl only has $1 on her. We're going to go to the dollar menu at McDonald's. And he just dies laughing. I mean, I was pretty cheap. I mean, I hated spending money on anything. And that psychological barrier, it actually hurt my speaking business. The reason it hurt my speaking business was because I didn't want to spend money on the business to grow the business. Instead of thinking in terms of how much I'm going to make, I always thought in terms of how much I was spending. Instead of thinking, okay, if I invest this, then I'll get this out of it. Instead of thinking, okay, if I'll invest $5,000, then I'll get $10,000 back, I was thinking like, man, they're just trying to get me to spend money. They're just trying to take money, and, oh, I'm not buying anything. That's essentially how I thought about everything. So I didn't want to reinvest back into my business. So that type of psychology, it held me back big time. And if I would have thought in terms of how much I'm going to make by investing in this, then I would have built everything a lot faster. One thing that you have to realize about your speaking business is that you have to invest money back into your speaking business. That might be through learning, it might be through advertising, it might be through hiring people in some way or another. You have to invest money back into your business. Speakers who expect to grow their business without investing money back into their business, they will slow down the results that they get for themselves and they won't even notice it. I realized a long time ago that speakers who don't invest in their business, they just don't get anywhere. And I also noticed another interesting thing. I mean, you see, for the longest time, I used to think that I was actually fully committed to growing my business. So, I mean, if someone would have asked me, hey, are you dead serious about growing your speaking business? I'd be like, hell yeah, of course I am. But I was essentially fooling myself. I mean, what I didn't know at the time is that when you invest in something, you get more serious about it. I remember the time when I actually hired my first web designer, and because I spent money on the business, I felt like I had to make it work. And when I hired guys to make my demo video, it forced me to work even more because I felt like it'd just be a waste of money to pay these guys and then to not do anything with it. People don't value what they get for free. And I understood that if I invested in something, then I'm psychologically telling myself how serious I am about that thing. The thing that I invested in, and instead of thinking, oh, is this going to work? And, oh, I don't know if this is going to work. Instead of thinking like that, I would essentially think, man, I'm going to make this freaking thing work. I just spent a couple $1,000s on this new website. So I would think I'm making this thing work. I hope you see the difference. When I was starting, I essentially, I didn't know any of this. I mean, I was just blindly building my business and nothing seemed to work. And the reason it didn't work was because I was fooling myself. I wasn't as committed as I thought I was. Really think about that. I mean, could you be more committed than what you are now? Are you holding yourself back without even realizing it? Could you do more with your speaking business than what you're doing right now? Don't be like most speakers and take forever to realize this stuff. A lot of times we feel like we have to keep saying all these positive thoughts and, oh, if we admit that we're doing something wrong, then we feel like it's a bad thing. But your first step to actually getting better is to realize what you need to improve. I remember being at an event and I was talking to a speaker who he wasn't getting on stages and he wasn't making any money, as a matter of fact. So I just asked him why. I was like, why do you think that you're not making money as a speaker? And he basically said, like, well, it's because I don't have money to spend on marketing. And he then went on to tell me that he can't hire someone to make his website. He can't hire someone to make his demo. He can't spend money on his business with the marketing, and he can't spend money on any speaker training to show him what to do. So I said, look, man, that's not your problem. The money's not your problem. Your problem is that you're not fully committed. You might not have the money to hire someone to build a website, so why don't you learn it yourself? You might not have the money for marketing, so why don't you sit down every single day and call 100 people? That's free. Your problem isn't money. Your problem is a lack of commitment. I went off on the guy. I mean, I was essentially pissed off at the guy making excuses. I just went off on him. I literally told him that he's not committed. So I told him that, like, look, nobody comes out of the womb just knowing how to build a website. They learn how to do it. And if other people can learn it, then so can you. The only reason you haven't learned to build your website, your speaker website, is because you're not fully committed to doing it. You're not as serious about your speaking business as you thought you were. What speakers don't realize is that money isn't stopping them from getting results. It's a lack of going all in. They hold themselves back and they blame it on outside circumstances rather than who they are. What's holding you back is your fear. Maybe you're wondering, like, oh, what if this doesn't work out? What if I run out of money? What if I lose the money? You got to take care of your family. You can't quit your job. Every excuse that you come up with for why you're not where you need to be in your speaking business is just a fear manifesting itself in an outer circumstance. The speaker who told me that he couldn't hire someone to build his website, well, I mean, that might be his circumstance. I mean, it could be true. He literally could have $2 in his bank, but that circumstance doesn't stop him from learning to do it himself. Maybe he doesn't have money to invest in training, but he isn't committed enough to find a way to make that money. There are lots of speakers out there who keep asking questions of how do I get more speaking engagements? And they think the problem lies outside of themselves. They think the reason they're not getting gigs is because they don't have the money, or they don't have the time because they have a job, or they can't build a website, or they can't do this, they can't do that. The problem is never outside of you. The information is always there if you look hard enough. And I mean, if they were serious, if these speakers were serious, they would go read every single blog post on the Speaking Lifestyle site. They would do whatever it took to get the right information to grow their speaking business. I've literally learned that if there's one thing that will allow you to build your speaking business, then it all comes down to your psychology. It all starts and ends with you. There is nothing outside of you that's stopping you from growing. And I remember talking to that speaker, and after I told him that he was not committed, he said, yeah, but we're different. I mean, I got a family to take care of, and hey, if I got $10,000 for a gig, I could easily grow my business too. Now, I'm the type of person who doesn't argue with people. I'll tell you something, and if you don't get it, I'll just let you keep doing what you're doing. And eventually, you'll either see it or you'll just keep wondering why things aren't turning out too well. So when that speaker said that we're different, I just said, okay, keep doing what you're doing then. I realized a long time ago that if someone isn't willing to change and they're not willing to open themselves up to it, then there's nothing you can do about it. The first step to changing something in your life is to realize that it needs to be changed. That speaker, he wasn't open to it. He still thought that the problem with his speaking business, his lack of gigs, lied outside of himself. What he didn't realize is that I started my speaking business from scratch. I didn't have a parent who could give me money. In fact, we were broke as hell. I didn't have any money to hire a web designer, so I learned it myself. I didn't have any money to spend on marketing, so I called people up. I sent a ton of emails. I crashed events, and I just talked to people in charge of the event to get them to hire me. None of that costs money. I built my business because I didn't care how much money I didn't have. I just focused on changing my situation. I knew that the problem wasn't that I didn't have money. It was that I needed to become the type of person who could build a business without money. So I was doing everything that I could. I would crash a lot of events. And I don't mean like crashing events just to attend the event. I would crash events so I could find the person in charge of the event and see and talk to them about getting them to hire me for a future event. Everyone knows that meeting planners, they host events at hotels. That's obvious. So if speakers know this, then why are they sitting at their house asking themselves, how do I get speaking gigs? Well, the answer is obvious. Go get in front of the people who can hire you. Go to the freaking hotel. And that's what I did. So instead of just sitting at the house waiting for the phone to ring, I went to hotels and I looked at the list of events going on for the day. And of course, I was wearing a suit because the way you dress, it changes how people respond to you. But once I saw an event, I would essentially just walk right into the event. And if there was someone like at the table, there were a couple people at the table for registrations, and maybe they stopped me, and I just say something like, oh, hey, yeah, my bad. I'm a speaker. I actually needed to talk to the person in charge of the event. Are they here? And I would just talk to people. I wouldn't be sneaky about what I was doing. I would just tell them, hey, I'm a speaker and I'm an entertainer, and I just wanted to connect with the person in charge. And because I do mind reading demonstrations, a lot of times I'd perform something for them as well. But I would essentially just walk in and just talk to the person in charge. You see, speakers think that the problem is outside of them. In reality, the problem is them. It's hard to admit that, but once you do, things start to change. I want you to imagine your current circumstances. I mean, maybe you have a family, very little money, whatever the circumstance. Imagine your current circumstances. Imagine something that's stopping you from getting at least 50 paid gigs a year. Now, I want you to imagine Tony Robbins replaces you. Imagine you switch places with Tony Robbins. So imagine that Tony Robbins now has the same family as you and only a little bit of money in his bank account or whatever you have. Imagine Tony Robbins is in the exact same circumstances as you, but Tony Robbins is still Tony Robbins, and he still has that drive and hunger in him. Now, here's the question. Do you think that Tony Robbins, being who he is, could fill up his entire speaking schedule with gigs? Do you think that he could change those circumstances in a couple of months? Well, of course he could. In fact, he actually did it. I mean, he was broke when he started. He was living in his car for a little bit. And I highly doubt that there are many speakers out there who could say that. I mean, at least most speakers, they have a house that they can live in. If Tony Robbins could be in your shoes and change your circumstances, then why can't you do it? What do you have to know? What do you have to learn? What do you have to do? And more importantly, who do you have to become to really take your speaking business to the next level? Let me give you an example of the type of thinking that's required for you to actually grow your speaking business and to really speak for a living. Here's an example. I mean, every speaker, they know that they should essentially have a follow-up sequence in place. I mean, like after you do a gig, you should have a sequence set up so you can actually get referrals and get spin-off gigs. I mean, all that jazz. Every speaker knows this. Every speaker needs to know exactly what to do in order to follow up. Here's the type of thinking that you need to engage in. My follow-up sequence, number one, it starts out before I ever get on stage. I mean, when a client actually hires me, I immediately put them into a calendar, into the calendar for next year. The date that I put them into the calendar is the same date that they contacted me for this year's event. So if they contacted me January 1st, 2015 to hire me for the event, I will go put them into the calendar for January 1st of 2016. Why do I do that? Because it lets me know when they hire speakers. If they contacted me on X date of this year, then that means that they look for speakers around the same time every year, assuming it's an annual event. Most company events, they're held during the same time as the previous year's events. So if they have an award banquet in June, then they will usually have a different award banquet in June of next year. So once a client hires me, they immediately get put into the calendar for next year to remind me to contact them again for next year. So when I'm at the event, though, I do several things. First, I collect multiple video testimonials. And the reason for that is because I want to use these video testimonials for video marketing, which obviously makes it a million times easier to get booked for other speaking gigs. Second thing I do is I do a one-on-one demonstration with the person who hired me. And it gets recorded. And whether it's with my phone, with their phone, or with other people's phones, I always have this one-on-one demonstration recorded with multiple phones, at least my phone. And the reason I do this is because it creates a very personal and memorable experience for the person who hired me. It allows me to build a better relationship with the meeting planner instead of just coming and going, just like how most speakers do. And after the event, this is where all the magic happens. So after I've spoken at the event's done, I send the video testimonials to the meeting planner who hired me. This way, they know what the audience thought of me. Meeting planners, they always want to know what people think of you, what people thought of your presentation. This is essentially why I tell speakers to always get a standing ovation, always go after the standing O. It's not because of your ego, but it's because it's a visual confirmation to the meeting planner of how everyone loved your presentation. So once maybe about 1 week after the event, I essentially send a video that has multiple video testimonials from the event itself. Everyone's like, oh, that was great, and that was an amazing presentation. And sometimes they'll actually use this video for future events. And guess what? If they do that, then they'll always be reminded of you. So either way, the more you stay in touch with the people who hired you, the more likely you're going to get hired again. So when I send the video testimonials, I also ask for referrals. Now, in the I think it's week 8 of the Speak Pro Academy, I go into detail about my entire process for getting referrals. But the referral thing, it really starts before they ever hire me. But this is just one of those moments where I actually ask for the referral. So I send the video testimonials. Then a few weeks later, I'll send them the second video with the one-on-one demonstration. My goal is not to well, my goal is to whew, man. My goal is to not only keep in touch with them, but to get them to remember the same feelings that they felt when they saw me live. So I want them to associate good feelings with me in general. So when they see the second video, the one-on-one demonstration, they remember what it felt like when it happened. And when I send the second video, I also ask about future events. So maybe they had the annual event that they hired me for, but they might also have several other events going on throughout the year. And that's something I want to know about. If they got 15 other events, I want to know about those events. And the reason I ask for those for other events when I send the second video is because I also let them know that I have essentially other tricks up my sleeve. I let them know that I can do more than just the one presentation that they saw. So a lot of times clients, they won't rehire you just because they essentially don't want the same presentation. So no matter how great the presentation was, they just don't want a repeat of it next year. So if, on the other hand, you let them know that you have another great presentation, then you're much more likely to get hired again. And by telling them that I have another great presentation and sending them the one-on-one video with the demonstration, it lets them link the two together. So they think to themselves, well, I mean, he did show me something after the stage presentation that was pretty cool. So, I mean, he probably does have some other really cool things that he can do. So what I've essentially done is I've allowed them to see the possibilities of other things that I can do. I then put any information from the event, like from their response, etc., put all the information into the calendar. And that way it just reminds me. So when this way, like when the calendar reminds me about their upcoming event, when it says June or January 2016, and it says, hey, contact these people, I have all the information I need just right there at hand. Once the calendar reminds me, so it's now 2016, I will then send them an email and I will give them a link to the video again. This way they kind of say, oh yeah, I remember this guy, I love this guy. That's basically my follow-up sequence for clients who already hired me. There are also sequences that I use to get spin-off gigs. There are sequences I use for people who are going through the lead generation systems who haven't really seen me on stage at all. There are different follow-ups that we use for different types of clients. That's essentially a small portion of how you should be thinking in order to grow your speaking business. Now, you could essentially come up with all that by yourself, which could really take a lot of time and a lot of guessing and stuff, or you could just simply copy what I'm doing. Notice how it's a process. I mean, step by step. Edward Deming, he said, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. The speakers who don't get gigs don't have a process. They don't have steps. And by process, that means that you have to be able to describe everything you're doing like you're talking to a 10-year-old kid. If you ask a speaker, how do you book gigs? 9 out of 10 are going to say word of mouth, and they can't really go into detail about it. I mean, there are speakers who just don't know what they're doing, which essentially means they're not getting any gigs. On the other hand, if you ask a speaker who is getting gigs, they can describe what they're doing. they can say like, oh, we send out mailings every 3 months to this list. We bought from this website. Then we call and we ask them these questions about their events. And when we're at the event, this is the way we get the spin-off gigs, and we collect the business cards from the people who host events, and we put them into a follow-up sequence. And then a week later, we contact them, we say this, and we do this. Basically, they have a process and they can describe it. I guarantee you that any speaker who is getting gigs has a process, a system for what they do. Tony Robbins, he doesn't just wake up and say, I wonder what we're going to do today. I mean, no, he knows what to do. If you can't describe how you get gigs, you're not getting any gigs. Your speaking business is completely dependent on the process you have set up, the systems that you have set up. When you wake up, what do? How do you get a consistent stream of gigs coming in? You have to know how to describe this step by step. Let me give you an example of a simple process that we set up for another speaker. This speaker, he wanted to use emailing to get gigs because he was just starting out and he didn't have a good enough website for lead generation systems like AdWords, nothing like that. So we essentially agreed, okay, emails are the best. So we gave him a directory of websites that he can go to in order to find the events. We also set up a spreadsheet on Google Spreadsheets so he can actually record several events that he just comes across randomly on the internet. Next, we set up his email templates. The first email template, it just had one purpose. It asked who's in charge of hiring speakers for the event. And the reason for this is because if you just come out and you just try to sell from the very get-go, just from the beginning, you might not actually be talking to the right person. So you want to make sure that you're talking to the right people. And the way it's worded by saying who hires speakers for the event, it also lets you know if they pay speakers or not. So if they don't pay speakers, then they're going to respond by saying, well, we don't actually pay our speakers. If they do pay speakers, then they'll say, John Doe hires all the speakers. So then once we got that set up, now we set up the second email where it essentially sells him as a speaker. And all of those emails, they're set up as templates. That way, we don't actually have to write the same thing over and over again. We just click a button and it just does it for you. Next, we essentially, he went to the websites, he found the events that he would be perfect for, and he used the email templates to contact people. So we had him keep track of how many people he was contacting every single day by just using a counter app on his iPhone. That way he could essentially make sure he's staying productive. And if people responded with interest, then they would essentially be put into a spreadsheet and their contact information would be kept. That way he could follow up with them later. This is a simple process that we had him set up and it works. But I want you to notice something about this. I mean, I didn't say that the way we get gigs is through word of mouth or the way we get gigs is emails. I didn't say that. I described a process. I described details. That's just one process. There are multiple ways for you to fill up your schedule with gigs. But it's all about understanding the details, the techniques, the tactics, all that stuff. I mean, that's essentially the easy part. The hard part really is being fully committed to making things happen no matter what situation you're in. And look, I mean, I know that, we all think we're committed, but you really have to open your eyes and realize that you can do more than what you're doing now. I mean, I remember the first time I spent money on advertising, and it was Google AdWords, and it took me forever to finally say, okay, I'll put $500 into Google AdWords. And it was obviously because I was afraid of losing money, and I was pretty cheap. So I wasn't as committed to growing the business as I thought I was, because I was letting little things like that just hold me back. Just $500, I was letting it hold me back. And of course, if someone would have asked me like, hey, are you committed? I'd be like, hell yeah, I'm committed. I'm going to make it work this time. This is it. This is my time. But deep down inside, I knew that I wasn't really as committed as I should be. The definition of commitment is to carry something out to do it. You cut off all other options. So I finally decided to invest $500 into Google AdWords. I mean, I finally did it, but I mean, I was secretly thinking like, oh man, what if I lose the money? And I mean, a lot of people do that. They essentially do that with products, advertising, all kinds of things. They essentially say that they're committed, but when it comes down to actually taking the action, to actually like carrying it out, they really don't do it. But I mean, I finally got the guts to invest $500 in advertising, and guess what? I mean, I was like, all right, let me $500 in Google AdWords. Guess what happened? Well, I lost all the money. It sucked. I mean, I didn't get a single gig out of the $500. My money was gone in like a week, but I didn't let that stop me. I mean, I got more money. I studied up on AdWords. I got smarter about it. I invested more money into it. Eventually, I had a really good AdWords campaign that had a low cost per click. It was really targeted, and I could fill my entire schedule off of Google AdWords alone. The reason it didn't work the first time and the second time and the third time was because I didn't know what I was doing. I was just guessing. I was just winging it. And a lot of people do that. They try to build their speaking business by winging it. They're just essentially guessing. They just wake up every day not sure on what they should be doing to take their business to a whole new level, and this causes them to stay in the same place for months and years. I've met several speakers who have technically been a speaker for a long time, 10, 12 years. I mean, for a long time, but they still have trouble getting gigs, and they still have trouble growing their business. Their speaking business, it looks the same this year as it did last year, and the year before, and 5 years ago, and 10 years ago. It looks the exact same. And for a long time, that's how my speaking business was, because I thought I could do everything myself. I mean, technically I did. It just took me about 7 years when I could have done it in a few months if I just simply had someone to show me what to do, really. But because I was just winging it, I blindly just threw money into it. Once I wised up, then I was essentially making more money at it. I mean, I really just kind of took a look around me. I kind of just looked at the results I was getting. Well, the more lack of results. And once I wised up, I essentially put my pride away. And I really started learning from what other successful speakers were really, really doing. Eventually, I started putting systems in place where I could just set it up once and get the gigs. The gigs would come in just like with AdWords. And once you have it set up, you're good to go. And you want to change the way you think about your speaking business. You want to set up the right systems so everything flows smoothly. It's one thing to say that you should have a follow-up system in place, but it's another to actually put it in place. Like the one I mentioned earlier. I mean, there are lots of speakers who are going to listen to this and they still won't have a follow-up system in place, even though I just gave them one. Because people in general, confuse knowing with doing. And that's just a small part of how everything works. That little follow-up system, just a small part. You need systems in place for your entire speaking business. You need systems for lead generation. You need systems for finding events, systems for figuring out a client's budget. You need all kinds of systems. Without having these in place, you're just wasting your time. And here's the thing. Putting these systems in place, it is hard. No doubt about it. Getting things started, it is hard. I'm not going to lie to you and say it's easy. It is hard, especially when you're doing it yourself. I know there are tons of people out there who are selling you products and seminars, and all this kinds of stuff, saying that it's easy, you can do it in a day or two, but it's not. That's not how it works. It's easier once you have a system in place. And I mean, once you follow it as well, it's easier, but it's not easy. If McDonald's gave you their entire system for fast food, then it's a lot easier. But if you had to build your own McDonald's from scratch, well, that's going to be hard as hell. McDonald's has a system for everything. I mean, you probably, if you've ever been to McDonald's or any fast food place, like Burger King or whatever, you probably heard beeps where there's like a beep with the fries, letting them know that the fries are ready. And when a car pulls up and they know that your car is there because it beeps in their headphones. McDonald's, they learned to set all this up because that beep and all these little things, it prevents the fries from being overcooked. The beep, it lets them know that there's a car out there so they won't be waiting forever. You very rarely, if ever, see burnt food at McDonald's. Whether you like the food or not, it doesn't matter. You don't see burnt food. And the reason is because they have systems in place to create a predictable outcome. That's what you need. You need systems in place that create predictable outcomes. If you were to start out by yourself, you wouldn't think about all these little details about placing a beep and having all these beep noises in your fast food business. After you've burnt several fries and hamburgers and customer complaints and all that, then you'd figure something out. But in the beginning, the detail is so small that you just wouldn't have even thought about it. But what if McDonald's, if you just had them tell you everything that you need to do, then you just wouldn't make those mistakes. Just like how I messed up with AdWords the first, second, third time. I don't know how many times I messed up. I messed up a lot. Just like how I messed up with AdWords, I messed up several times before I finally got it. It's the same thing. It wasn't just the $500. I spent a lot of money before I finally got it. And it was because I didn't have someone there telling me what to do. And I mean, that actually leads me to this thing. When you're running a business, there are no guarantees that things are going to work. Most speakers, they don't build their business because they're scared of losing money. They're thinking like, well, what if this doesn't work? What if I lose the money? And you know what? Maybe it won't work. You probably will lose money. And if that scares you, then get out of business. There isn't a single business out there that hasn't lost money. Even Warren Buffett loses money. I realize that the difference between the speakers who grow a business and the ones who don't are that the ones who don't grow a business will always ask, is this going to work? But the ones who do, the ones who speak full time, making at least six figures or more, these are the speakers who ask, how can I make this work? How can I make this happen? Even if they lose $500 on Google AdWords, they say, okay, how do I make this thing happen? How do I make it work? You have to become the type of speaker who doesn't ask, is this going to happen? You have to become the type of speaker who makes things happen. When I put money into AdWords the first time, I lost it. And the second time, I lost it. But I was determined to figure out how to freaking make the thing work. I was determined to figure out how to make it happen because I knew that AdWords worked. I just couldn't make it work at that time. And this applies to everything. Books, courses, events, everything. It's not the product that works. It's you that makes it work. You have to take full responsibility, 100% responsibility on making things work in your speaking business. The moment you essentially place responsibility of your speaking business on someone else or something else, you've lost. You shouldn't be the type of speaker who dabbles in things. You shouldn't be the type of speaker who has 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You either go all in or you get out. But if you're truly committed to stepping up your game, then good for you, because you're the type of speaker that will make things happen. You're probably the type of speaker who doesn't mess around with stuff. So let me give you the 3 things that you need to do to grow your speaking business. This is the evolution of your speaking business. It's how you build a business from scratch. And if you're ready to step up your game in the speaking business and the speaking industry, then you do need to invest in the Speak Pro Academy. It's built into a 90-day program, 12 weeks, where you watch a video and every single week you get the work done for that week. Then you go on to the next week. You get the work done. It's a step-by-step program for growing your speaking business from the ground up. You get everything, and I mean everything, the templates, the resources, the contracts, everything, the systems for getting gigs, lead generation, everything. By the time you're finished, you will be speaking for a living, and I'll talk more about it soon. But here are the 3 things that you need to do to grow your speaking business from the ground up. Number 1 is image. Number 2 is process. Number 3 is growth. Now, I want you to think of these things as more like a circle rather than a ladder, and more of a circle rather than steps 1, 2, 3. And the reason for that is because you're always going to take your business to the next level. It's a repeatable process where you're constantly replacing information on your website, you're getting new video footage, all that stuff, and all of that allows you to grow. So let's start at the first one, the image. I always say this because it will literally change your entire speaking career if you just get this one thing down and just get this one thing in your head. If you want to charge $10,000 for a speaking gig, then you have to look like a $10,000 speaker. I was at a hotel doing an event and I was getting $12,000 for my speaking fee. And I'm talking with another speaker who's doing another event, and I find out that he's getting $3,000 for his presentation. So I thought to myself, okay, what's the difference? I mean, why am I getting $12,000 and he's only getting $3,000? And it wasn't that I was way better than this guy. I mean, even though my ego would want me to believe that, I haven't seen this guy speak, so for all I know, he could be amazing. He could be a million times better than me. So why was I able to charge so much more than this guy? And I realized that the difference is because of the way I did my marketing. I just knew how to create an image around myself that allowed me to charge more for a speaking gig. It's the same way with any speaker. Les Brown, Brian Tracy, Tony Robbins. Why can they charge more than other speakers? I mean, it's because they built an image around themselves. It's not that they're a million times better than all the other speakers. The difference is the image that they created for themselves. Your image will determine how much you can charge for a gig. And it will determine whether or not people want to hire you or if they're just looking for a random speaker. Now, I mean, what do I mean by that? Well, let me give you an example. The guy who contacted me from Aflac not too long ago, he saw me at another event, and he said that he wanted me at their event in Santa Monica. So he asked about my prices. Once we agreed and he agreed to the fees, then he sent another email saying, hey, which date would work for you to do the event? Because I asked him, I said, when is the event? He said, well, what date is good for you? And essentially he allowed me to pick the date that worked best for my schedule. And then they set up the entire event based on that date. That's the type of client you want. They clearly wanted me and not just some random speaker. And when that happens, you're much more valuable and everything just runs smoother. The same thing happened with a client in Finland. They saw a video of me and they knew that they wanted me for the event, not just some random speaker. And the way that came about was I essentially created a certain image, the image on my website with the videos, the testimonials, everything that demonstrates to people that I'm worth what I'm asking for. And when I got to Finland, I actually asked him like, hey, how did you find me? And he said like, oh, it was through the internet. But then he said, to be honest, after looking at your website and your videos, we almost didn't contact you because we didn't know if we could afford you or if that you'd even be available. That's the image that you want to have. If someone looks at your website and your marketing materials and you look like you're barely making it, then you won't be able to charge much and you just won't get any gigs. But if they look at your website and they see that you look like a freaking celebrity, then you're going to book more gigs at a higher price. And the one thing that I want to point out is that your marketing materials, it really comes down to one thing: your website. In the past, it was all about having a great promo packet, a nice one sheet, and all of that other stuff. Now it's about your website. Your website has video footage, the pictures, the video testimonials. Clients hire speakers based on videos. They want to see you in action. Do not, I repeat, do not focus on building a one-sheeter and all that other nonsense. Do not build your promo pack and all that stuff. Clients don't ask for one sheets. One sheets don't get you hired. Clients ask and they want to see video footage. They want to see what you're like on stage. Who cares what you write about on a piece of paper on a one sheet? The only people that I've ever come across who talk about one sheets, the only people are other speakers. And the reason for that, the reason they talk about it is because they feel like they're getting something done. They feel that by creating a one sheet, they're moving their speaking business forward. And even though they're actually not doing anything that matters, they feel like they're doing something. Benjamin Franklin said, never confuse motion with action. And that's what you really have to take to heart. Just because you're doing something doesn't mean you're doing the right thing. Clients, they're going to ask for a bio. They might ask for a bio to put into a program description, and the bio is usually very short. But they never ask for a one sheet. They don't even know what it is. Very few speakers will actually tell you this because they either don't really book gigs for a living or because they're just trying to sell you stuff you don't need. I guarantee you that a good video will book you more than any type of one sheet you will ever create. So when you're building your image as a speaker, focus on your website. Focus on adding good videos to your website, adding good pictures, adding good social proof like the testimonials. Focus on that, not stuff like your one sheet. And by the way, your bio, you should be able to create that in a single day, and not even a day, in 30 minutes. And when you're starting from scratch, you have to get creative about the ways that you get video footage and the ways you get pictures, because it's harder when you're starting because you don't have any good marketing materials, but it's just a matter of you getting creative with it. I can show you how to do everything from scratch. I mean, I don't care if you're just starting out or if you've been doing this for a long time. I can show you things in your speaking business that you haven't even thought of. It's time to stop messing around and start taking your business to a new level. It's time to raise the bar. If you're starting from scratch, then you will have to work harder than everyone else. You can't just work 1 hour a day and expect to build a business. It's like what Mark Cuban said. You have to work like there's someone working 24 hours a day trying to take it all away from you. Building your image as a speaker is the starting point of your speaking business. It's what separates you from other speakers, and it's the difference between the speaker who fills up his entire schedule versus a speaker who struggles to get one gig after another. The second part of building your speaking business is to make sure you essentially have your process down. Make sure your systems are all set up. Now, I mentioned this earlier because, it really is that important. You have to know the details of what you're doing. You have to know how you're going to fill up your speaking schedule with gigs. If you don't know, then you just won't get gigs. It's that simple. You have to think through everything that you're doing. You have to say to yourself, okay, where am I going to find events? What website? What specific website? What am I going to type into Google? What am I going to say to people? How will I follow up with clients? What questions am I going to ask when people want to hire me? And that's just a small piece of what you should be asking. Your process should be so clear that you should be able to describe it to a 10-year-old kid. You should literally be able to say like, okay, little man, go to this website, type this in. They're going to say these things. And when they say this, I want you to say this. If you can't make it that clear, then something needs to change. When I created the Speak Pro Academy, I made sure to include the details because that's what makes things work. It's one thing for me to say, hey, send out emails and get gigs. It's another thing for me to say, okay, here, use this template. After you send this email, do this, then do that. I made sure to make the entire process very clear in the Speak Pro Academy. The speakers who build out their systems and they build out their process, those are the ones who get booked. Those are the ones who get gigs. And there are two ways that you can essentially build out your process for your speaking business. Number one, you can do it all by yourself. Just kind of like just winging it, taking a long time. Or you can just look at what other speakers are doing, other successful speakers, and just simply learn from that speaker. It's kind of like someone who tries to lose weight all by themselves, or someone who just hires Arnold Schwarzenegger to just help them through the process. Of course, you can go on the internet, you can look up all the science, look up workouts, look up the health diets and all that stuff. You can do all that by yourself. It's going to take you a while. Or you can just say, hey, Arnold, just show me everything you know, and he'll just get you fit. So make sure that you get your entire process down, the steps, the actions, everything that you need to do every single day. And that brings me to the third part. The third part of your speaking business is growth. How do you scale your business? How do you grow it? Like really grow it. When I started, I was having a hard time just charging $200 because everyone would say things like, "Hey, can you speak for free?" Or, "Oh, there's going to be a lot of people. It's good exposure." And I can't tell you how many times people wanted me to speak for free or at a huge discount because of the exposure. And it pissed me off. I mean, because I knew that I was worth a whole lot more, but people just weren't paying for it. They were like, "Oh, it's good exposure." They wanted a great speaker, but they didn't want to pay for one. I mean, it's like they didn't see the difference between hiring a professional speaker and Joe Schmo from accounting. And it sucks. I mean, it sucks when you've been speaking for a while, but you're not really sure how to take it to the next level. So I felt stuck. I mean, it's like I've been doing the same thing over and over and over again, but I wasn't really getting anywhere. I mean, it wasn't until I did essentially one thing that allowed me to take it up a notch, to take it to a whole new level. See if you can catch on to this. So first, I paid for a new website. Now, that's not the one thing, but bear with me. So first, I paid for a new website. Next, I paid for a new demo. Then I paid for advertising. And then I definitely paid to educate myself more. Now, I just mentioned 4 things. And within those 4 things, there's something hidden that most people miss. It's a huge hurdle that speakers have to overcome to take their business to the next level. I'll say it again. 4 things. I paid for a new website. I paid for a demo video. I paid for advertising, and I paid to educate myself. Do you see it? Do you see what I did? I paid for a new website, paid for a demo, paid for advertising, paid to educate myself. What do those have in common? Basically, I reinvested back into my business. The first time I put money back into the business, I was scared as hell. And I was scared that I was going to lose it all. I mean, like I said before, I hated spending money. I was cheap. I wanted to get things for free. And that mindset is spilled over to my business. So I didn't want to reinvest back into the business. What I didn't realize at the time is that there isn't a single speaker who has ever grown their business without reinvesting. And I thought to myself, like, how ridiculous would it be if Tony Robbins said, I'm not going to pay for a new website. I'm not going to pay for the room to host my seminars. I just don't want to spend any money on my business. I mean, why can't someone just do it and work for me and just take a 20% commission? Think about how ridiculous that'd be if Tony Robbins said something like that. After I gave myself this wake-up call, I started putting money into the business and growing it. At the time, I was happy to get $2,000 for a gig. When I started reinvesting back into the business, I took it to a whole new level. The key factor when it comes to growing your speaking business is to eradicate complacency. When you're complacent, you don't change. You're comfortable with where you are, and this comfort is what stops you from growing. If I was comfortable making only $2,000 for a gig, then I never would have gotten to a point where I was charging $10,000. You have to learn how to eradicate complacency. There's always another level. Don't be complacent with the way things are. Get new information, learn new things, get a mentor who will show you what to do. Let me tell you what's essentially going to stop you from growing your speaking business to the point that it should be. And it's what stops every single speaker, and they don't even realize it. What's going to stop you is letting your ego get in the way and not admitting that you need help. I ask speakers all the time, what do you need help with in your speaking business? And a lot of speakers say things like, I don't really need help at this time. I mean, my business is good. Here's the thing. If you think for 1 second that you don't need help with anything in your speaking business, then you're lying to yourself. I guarantee you, if you were to go up to Tony Robbins, the guy who's dominating the speaking industry, and if you were to ask him what things he needs help with, and he were to give you an honest answer, I guarantee you that he can give you a list of things. Not just one thing, he would give you a list. Maybe he needs help with hiring better people or keeping his best people on staff. Whatever it is, I guarantee you he would say, here's the things that we're working on. Here's what I need help with. If the guy at the top of the industry is always improving his business, then any speaker who says they don't need help with anything is lying. Any speaker who says, I don't need help, I don't really need more information, any speaker who says those types of things is going to run their business into the ground. And I guarantee you that they're not as successful as they want to be. That's just the mindset of a winner. A winner just keeps improving. Even the billionaire Ray Dalio says to himself, hey, what don't I know? If a billionaire is always looking for information to improve himself, then everyone should be looking for ways to improve themselves. My goal today was to give you tons of information on how to grow your speaking business. And if you like that information, then I want to invite you to invest in the Speak Pro Academy and spend 90 days, a total of 12 weeks, where I'm helping you take your speaking business to the next level. What we're going to do in the Speak Pro Academy is we're going to build up your entire speaking business. I don't care if you're brand new to speaking. I don't care if you've been speaking for a while and you just want to get more gigs. I'm going to build up your entire speaking business. If you're brand new and you don't have any video footage, any pictures, you don't even know your topic, any of that, I'm going to show you how to get it all, how to do it all. No theory, no nonsense, none of that crap. I tell you specifically what to do. If you've been a speaker for a while and you just need to step up your game and you just want to get more gigs, then I will walk you through my process. I will show you the lead generation systems that I use, and I will go into detail about how I fill up my schedule on a consistent basis, how I get publicity, how I hire people, everything you need to know. When you invest in this program, and then once you register to the site, you will get access to everything, so you can go at your own pace. Even though I recommend you follow it week by week, you can go at your own pace. The Speak Pro Academy was created in a way that guides you step by step with everything in your speaking business. On top of that, if you can think of something that I left out, send me an email and I will more than likely make a video on it. This is the ultimate speaker program, a complete program. It's consistently being updated in order to stay with the times. If you do exactly what I tell you, then you will book more gigs and you will grow your business. You'll essentially speak for a living. If you have any questions as you're going through the program, then just send me an email. Anyone who's a member of the Speak Pro Academy, they get priority over everyone else on Speaking Lifestyle. Everyone else except my coaching clients and my mom. But now's your time. If you're willing to put in the work, if you're willing to do what it takes, then I'm willing to get you to a point where you're speaking on stages that you want to be speaking on. This is your owner's manual. This is the complete system that you've been waiting for. There comes a moment in everyone's life where one decision can determine the rest of your life. This is that moment, one little decision, and I will show you how the speaking business really works. I will show you how to really grow as a speaker, and I will give you everything you need to get to a point where you are speaking for a living. Click the button and you will see everything in the program. Click the button to see what it's about, and I will talk to you soon.